as if the grief refused to give him space to breathe. Have you been there before? Have you walked in the depth of the sea? Can you bind the stars? Hello, dear friend. Welcome back to Stories of Faith and Grace podcast. We're stepping into the first story in our More Than a Conqueror series, and this one begins in silence. There are moments in life when everything goes quiet, not a peaceful quiet, the kind that feels like absence, like something that should be there isn't, and you find yourself standing in the middle of it, quietly wondering if God has simply looked away. If you've ever been in that place, and I suspect many of us have, then this story is for you. We're stepping into the story of Job, and let me say this from the beginning. This is not a tidy story. It doesn't resolve quickly. It doesn't offer easy answers. It offers something deeper. It gives us a man who is real, honest, grieving, and questioning. And it shows us what faith looks like when it has nowhere comfortable to stand. So let's go back, way back. There was a man in the land of Oz, and his name was Job. And from the very beginning, Scripture tells us something remarkable about him. Job was blameless and upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. You know, that's not Job describing himself. That's not the opinion of his friends. That is God's own testimony about him. Now, Job was wealthy, not just comfortable, but deeply, visibly blessed. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. Scripture says he was the greatest of all the people of the East. Now, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. That was a full house, a full life. Everything about Job's life looked like the tangible evidence of God's favor. But what stands out most is not what he had, it's how he lived. So because Job was faithful in the quiet ways nobody sees, after his children gathered for feasting, Job would rise early before the sun had fully broken and offer burnt offerings for each of them, one by one. Not occasionally, not when he felt like it, but regularly. Because he would say, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Now, that's the kind of man he was. He was tender, he was thoughtful and devoted, not performing faith, but actually living it. Quietly, consistently. He wasn't perfect. No one is, but he was genuine and God knew it. And then, without warning, everything changed. There was a moment in the heavenly realm where the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And guess what? Satan came among them, and God said something striking. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth." God himself pointed to Job. He said, "Look at this man." But you know, Satan answered with a question that cuts the core of the entire story. Does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, he only loves you because you've given him everything. Take it all away and he will curse you to your face. And God knew Job's heart completely. So God allowed the test to begin. All that he has is in your power. Only do not touch the man himself. That's what God said to Satan. And then, in a single day, everything fell apart. While Job's children were feasting together, a messenger came. "The Serbians have attacked, taken the oxen and donkeys, and killed the servants." Before he could even process it, another came. Fire has fallen from heaven and burned up the ship and more servants. Then another. The Chaldeans have taken the camels and killed the rest. And then before the last words could settle, a fourth messenger arrived. Your sons and daughters were feasting together. A great wind struck the house. It collapsed, and they are all gone. 4 messengers, 4 losses. Each one arriving before the last had finished speaking. As if the grief refused to give him space to breathe. Have you been there before? And do you know what Job did? He tore his robe. He shaved his head. He fell to the ground and he worshipped. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Again, Scripture says, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. You know, we shouldn't rush past that moment because Job wasn't pretending. He wasn't suppressing his grief. He was on the floor, broken, grieving, undone. But even from the floor, he refused to let go of God. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary faith. But the story goes deeper, friends. Satan returned and said, a man will give everything he has for his life. Touch his body, and he will curse you. And this time, Job's health was taken. Painful boils covered him from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. He sat in ashes, scraping his skin with broken pottery. And his wife, the one person still beside him, looked at him and said, do you still hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Even she had reached her limit. And Job answered her, not harshly, I believe, but firmly. Shall we receive good from God and not trouble? And again, friends, Scripture says, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Then his friends came, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When they first saw him, they wept. Of course, he was in a terrible state. They sat with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights. No words, just presence. And for a moment, they got it right. But then they decided to speak. And what came out was theology without compassion, truth without tenderness. They told Job in different ways that he must have done something to deserve this. Because, in their understanding, God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. And so they looked at Job and thought, this must be your fault. And that kind of pain is a different kind of wound. Now, Job knew they were wrong, and so he did something honest, something deeply human. He cried out, he questioned, he wrestled, he demanded answers. He said things that make us uncomfortable. And yet, underneath all of that, there was something unshaken. There's a verse that captures it clearly. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Now, Job wasn't saying everything was fine. He wasn't performing faith. He wanted answers. He said, so I desire to speak to the Almighty. I want to argue my case. But beneath the questions, beneath the grief, beneath the silence, there was a quiet, immovable resolve. Even if I don't understand, even if this never changes, I will not let go of God. And for much of this story, God is silent. Job speaks, his friends speak, the suffering remains, and heaven is quiet. And that silence is one of the most honest parts of this entire story. because many of us know it. We've been there. We understand it. The prayers that feel unanswered, the waiting that stretches longer than we expected. Job sat in silence, friends. Not peacefully, not easily, but faithfully. He stayed. And finally, God spoke. Not with explanations, not with the answers Job had asked for, but from the middle of the whirlwind. And he asked questions. God said, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Have you walked in the depth of the sea? Can you bind the stars?" A full chapter were questions that God was asking Job. It sounds overwhelming, almost confrontational. But what God was doing was lifting Job's eyes, reminding him that there is a vastness to what God sees and knows, far beyond what any human can hold or imagine. Job could see one thread. God sees the entire tapestry. And something shifted, not because Job got answers, but because he encountered God. And he said, "I had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Before this, Job knew about God, but now, through loss, through silence, through surrender, he knew God deeply, personally, and then, guess what? Restoration came. God even defended Job before his friends. God said, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Now, even in his questions, even in his wrestling, God called him my servant. And then the Lord restored the fortunes of Job and gave him twice as much as before. His family returned, his life was rebuilt, his later days were filled with blessing. And scripture closes with this simple, powerful line. Job lived long, saw generations after him, and he died old and full of days. Not just long life, but a full one. And maybe that is the quiet message of the story, that faith is not the absence of questions. It is the refusal to let go of God in the middle of them. Hebrews defines faith as the substance of things hoped for and evidence of things not yet seen. Even when life is stripped down to ashes, God is still present. And sometimes the deepest knowing of Him is found not in comfort, but in the place where everything else has fallen away, and He is all that remains. But here is what I want to leave with you today. Job's victory wasn't the moment he got everything back. His victory was every single day he refused to let go. Every morning he sat in ashes and still, even in the silence, kept his face toward God. Every night the quiet stretched on and he chose again not to curse what he still somewhere believed to be good. The restoration was beautiful. God's generosity at the end was overwhelming, but the faithfulness, the staying, that was the miracle. Maybe you are in a Job season right now. Maybe things have been taken from you that you never expected to lose. Maybe the silence has been, going on longer than you can easily explain to people. Maybe the friends around you are offering theology instead of tenderness, and it isn't helping. I want to say this gently but clearly. God has not looked away from you. The silence is not abandonment. The delay is not denial. And your honest, raw, trembling questions, they do not disqualify you from His presence. Job asked all of them. He argued, he wept, he demanded. And at the end of it all, God called him my servant and said he spoke what was right. You can grieve. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to say, this is so hard. You're allowed to sit in the ashes for a while, but don't let go. Stay. Keep whispering His name, even when your voice shakes. Because one day, in His timing, in His way, the whirlwind will speak. And what you'll find on the other side of the silence is not just restoration. You will find that you know Him in a way you never could have imagined. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. That is what it looks like to be more than a conqueror. Not someone who never suffers, but someone who in the middle of the suffering refuses to disconnect from the God who holds them. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Still, I will trust. Thank you so much, friends, for sitting with this story today. It's a heavy one, but I hope it settled something in you rather than unsettled you. If this episode met you somewhere real, please share it with someone who might be in their own Job season right now. They may need to hear that staying is enough. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in our More Than a Conqueror series. We're going to look at two resurrection stories, Jairus' daughter and Lazarus. Two families, two desperate waits, one God who is never late. Until then, hold on. God sees you. Grace and peace always. Bye.